don't have one. There we go. Okay. Secretary will call roll, please.
Commissioner Tolson. Commissioner Kennedy.
Here.
Commissioner Rice.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Mayor.
Here.
Chairperson Mann.
Here. May I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Commissioner Rice made the motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Vice Chair Vana Mayor made the second by consensus. Anybody have a problem with the agenda? Okay. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Vice Chair Mayor made the motion. Second?
I'll second.
Commissioner, Commissioner Kennedy. I had a problem with Commissioner, let alone Kennedy. Jeez. Commissioner Kennedy, again, any lack of consensus, any problem with the agenda? Sorry, minutes? Okay, minutes stand approved. We're on a roll here. The secretary will read the declaration of conflict, please.
If any member of the Planning Commission may have a conflict of interest or any reason why that member must abstain from consideration of any matter on this agenda, he or she should so declare at this time.
Any declarations of conflict? Seeing none, hearing none. Public statements. This is the time allotted for public statements or comments for all items other than public hearing items. Is there anyone in the chamber wishing to be heard on any item that's not an agendized item? Okay. Moving on. Correspondence. Is there any correspondence from the Deputy Director, City Planner?
Yes, Chairperson Mann, the supplemental staff report for agenda number 9A was provided to you here at your desk tonight regarding a typographical correction on that agenda item.
Okay. And we have nothing on consent. Oh, we do. Everything on consent. Sorry about that one. Okay, consent calendar review of potential fiscal year 2024-25 capital improvement program for conformance with the City of Simi Valley General Plan. Mr. Gibson, you want to tell us more about that?
Yes, Chairman Mann, members of the Planning Commission. Yeah, this is the annual review of our capital improvement program for conformance with the Simi Valley General Plan and determination that the project is exempt from California Environmental Quality Act. And should you wish to discuss it, you could recommend that the item be pulled from the agenda. Otherwise, you can recommend that the consent calendar be approved.
Does anybody have any questions, comments, answers, remarks, suggestions on the consent calendar item? Then do I have a motion? Just a motionable item? Or is it consent?
It's motion.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Motion from Commissioner Rice. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Vice Chair Mayor seconded.
Let's go ahead and take a vote.
And this is going to be a vote. So feel free to vote. Don't forget to lock it in.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Continue business, none, new business. Give it a little tab here. And there's nothing in my little calendar for new business. Okay.
So on new business, we have
Housing law presentation.
housing
So
law
again-
presentation.
Mr. Gibson, I'll let you go ahead and do the intro presentation to this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Mann, members of the Planning Commission. Deputy City Attorney Epi Margolin is going to provide a presentation on new housing law and related presentations regarding accessory dwelling unit, CEQA, some other new requirements from the 23-24 legislative session. And I'll turn it over to Epi.
Thank you. We'll keep it pretty casual, so if you have any questions during my presentation, please just speak up, interrupt, and we can talk about them. This is just supposed to be informative about some of the new laws that have been enacted by the state legislature and signed into law by the governor, even if they haven't gone into effect, and some of the stuff that the planning department is working on to enact those laws. So we're going to go over a couple different categories of new laws dealing with the density bonus law, the California Environmental Quality Act, accessory dwelling units, housing policies, which is just really refers to one unique bill that affects religious institutions and institutions of higher education ability to build housing in the city, affordable housing, housing elements, and parking. And each of these I'll kind of summarize kind of the background of the current state of the law and then the changes made by the new laws. So next slide, please. So the state density bonus law is codified in the government code. The city has its own density bonus law. They work kind of in tandem. The city can be more generous, but it can't be more restrictive than the state's density bonus law. Generally, the intent of the density bonus law is to require, on the state level, it's to require local governments to permit construction of additional rental units if developers include affordable units in their housing. The law has been really amended every year the past 5-6 years to rein in city discretion. It only applies to projects of 5 or more units. So, fourplexes and below doesn't count. So it's a state mandate also, which I think is crucial to note, which means that developers are entitled to these benefits if they qualify for the law, and that determination is made by the planning staff at the staff level. So the amount of the density bonus, of course, fluctuates with the amount of affordable housing that's included in a project. The more affordable housing, the more density bonus and other benefits you get. And those benefits are usually called incentives or concessions. These are reductions, in site development standards, a modification of a zoning code, waiver of architectural requirements, reduction in setback, minimum square footage, those kinds of things. It can also include mixed-use zoning, so commercial development in part of these projects, or other regulatory incentives. Developers are also entitled to unlimited waivers of development standards if a city's development standard would physically preclude the construction of the project. Again, think required setbacks, height, open space requirements, those kinds of things. If the developer just says, though, it's not penciling out financially, then the developer has to demonstrate to the city a financial need for these waivers. Also reduce parking, of course. So the density bonus law applies to the kinds of housing on screen: affordable housing, senior housing, donations of land for affordable housing, childcare, and then transitional foster youth, disabled veteran, and homeless housing. The city can only deny a proposed incentive or concession or waiver if it has an environmental impact report or other study that identifies public health or safety impacts, that granting the developer, a waiver of a setback requirement or an open space standard would have. So, of course, the study's got to be based on objective written standards, and EIRs always are. And the city also would have to prove that the impacts of the waiver couldn't be mitigated, or if it would not be mitigated. Next slide, please. So there's 2 new laws that affect the state's density bonus law this year. First, there's AB 1287. This adds kind of another layer of density bonus law. So, again, the general principle here is that the more affordable units, the more density bonus you get. Starting as of January 1st, the city has to grant 5 concessions and incentives instead of 4 for projects that are 100% affordable to lower income households, except that 20% have to be set aside for moderate income households. I'm not going to get too deep into the math here. It's kind of complicated, and I didn't have time to actually include like a chart of this. But I think the state's HCD is going to develop a new chart so that you can see, and staff, every time they look at a project, will look at, how many affordable units are being proposed, what density bonus is the developer claiming. The next bill, SB 713, amends the definition of a development standard to include regulations adopted by the city or the city's voters, by initiative. If you remember earlier, the city's development standards can't physically preclude the construction of a density bonus law project, or else the developer can waive its application. So previously, development standard was defined as a construction condition, such as like a height limitation, setback, floor area ratio, those kinds of things. And it really just, this change, state law codifies a HCD technical assistance memo, which is not binding. So it just restates that and says, local governments can't impose standards that stop density projects from moving forward based on this kind of broader definition of development standard. A lot of times in the past, cities would say, actually, this was an open space standard adopted by our voters. It's not a development standard. It's something completely different. And HCD said, no, that's not the case. And now the state legislature has weighed in as well and said and agreed. Next slide, please. So now the CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. This is, we frequently CEQA projects or projects that involve CEQA come before the Planning Commission. The purpose of CEQA is really, it's informational. It's to, help the planning agency and the governing body of cities and counties understand what the environmental impacts of projects are, and help mitigate those impacts. It was enacted in 1970. Next slide, please. And for every project, the city's got to determine whether an activity is a project that qualifies for CEQA. Not everything qualifies as a project, but determine whether, if it is a project, whether the project is exempt or subject to CEQA. If the project is not exempt, the city has to decide whether the project significantly affects the environment, whether there'll be no effects, or to do that, it must conduct an initial study. So generally, projects are discretionary actions that would cause a physical change in the environment. There's a lot of CEQA exemptions, some of which you may be familiar with, such as ones for existing facilities, replacement of construction, replacement or reconstruction of existing facilities, new construction or conversion of small structures, minor alterations to land or land use limitations, or just generally informational action that won't have an effect on the environment, accessory structures, ADUs, small parking lots, seasonal items such as lifeguard towers, portable restrooms, mobile food units. Those are all kinds of things that are exempt from CEQA. If the city does determine that a project is subject to CEQA and that an initial study must be conducted, the city has to include a bunch of things in the study, such as a description of the project, an identification of its environmental effect, a discussion of ways to mitigate those effects, and a determination of whether the project would be consistent with the city's existing land use plans and zoning plans. Next step, please. Slide, please. Excuse me. So steps for CEQA compliance. So after the city does the initial study, the initial study will say, oh, there's a substantial evidence that there will be an effect on the environment, or there won't be. If there won't be, then the city can adopt a negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration. If there is substantial evidence that a project will affect the environment, though, then the city must generally prepare and certify an EIR, an environmental impact report, which is a lengthier and more detailed document than the initial study itself. Next slide, please. Again, the EIR is only an informational document for decision makers to rely on when making a decision about a project. The focus is on kind of, adequacy, completeness, not exactly technical perfection about the project. There's a whole public comment period, so back and forth, so people can point out errors, and the city preparing, or if there's a consultant preparing the EIR, can have time to correct those errors as well. Next slide, please. Kind of at the end of the process or during the public comment period, or if the project changes, there's a chance, because it can be quite lengthy, the EIR process, there's a chance for revisions and recirculation, for additional public comment, if new significant information is identified. Generally, the consultant and the city attorney's office get together and have to decide based on some cases whether the new information provided is in fact actually significant. So that's kind of a tough thing to decide sometimes. Next slide. But in terms of new CEQA laws, there's about three, I think, to be aware of. The first is Assembly Bill 1449, which says that 100% affordable housing projects are exempt from CEQA. This is part of the state's effort to build more affordable housing in the state. So to qualify for this, at least two-thirds of the square footage of the project have to be residential. The other 1/3 can be commercial. The site has to be served by existing utilities or extensions. It has to be 75% of the perimeter of the site has to adjoin urban uses. So we're not really focused on too much brownfield development. And again, kind of the state has this like classic environmental protection that they're inserting into most bills these days for new housing, which says it can't be in a very high hazard severity zone, or not in a flood, landslide, or wildlife habitat. Next slide. There's a couple other bills. The first is SB 91 that eliminates the sunset date for CEQA exemptions for conversions of motels and hotels to supportive or transitional housing. I think this is mostly focused on big cities like the city of LA, where this is a big part of their effort to reduce the unhoused population. There's also AB 1633, which extends provisions of the Housing Accountability Act to CEQA. So the Housing Accountability Act says that a city can't disapprove a housing development project when a project qualifies for the act, which is generally has to include a certain amount of affordable housing, comply with the city's objective standards, and so forth. So it expands that to include instances where city fails to issue an exemption for CEQA, adopts a negative declaration or addendum for the project, or certifies an EIR or another comparable environmental document. So essentially, this is to stop cities from killing projects that qualify for the Housing Accountability Act without a city council vote or a planning commission vote. So the state is kind of trying to close loopholes that way. Again, there's all these kind of small details, saying that the housing project can't be located on a environmentally sensitive area. It's got to be an urbanized area, those kinds of things. And it only applies to projects that are denser than 15 units per acre. Next slide, please. There's also, every year there's new laws about ADUs. These are also called second units, in-law units, casitas, or granny flats. Governor Newsom pledged to create 3.5 million new housing units when he assumed office by 2025. I think 1/6 of all new housing units built in California are ADUs. So they're a large part of the production, which is a large part of the state's housing production, which is why they're a big focus of new state laws. The state allows local agencies to impose standards on ADUs, such as parking, height, setbacks, landscape, architectural review, and certain limits on actually, it should specify certain limits on the height and the maximum size of a unit. But it's pretty well regulated. I'm not going to talk too much about JADUs, junior accessory dwelling units, but I'll just mention that they're a specific type of conversion of existing space that are entirely within a single-family dwelling. So they're not in the backyard or anything like that. They just have a separate entrance into the kind of the main house or the primary dwelling. The city's ADU standards and JADU standards are located at Chapter 934. So they require ministerial review, so they don't come to the Planning Commission. Full kitchens are required for fully detached ADUs in the city, and they're only allowed in certain single-family or multifamily zones. When we have setback, color, material, window placement, and other standards. Next slide, please. So there's a couple new ADU laws. First, there's AB 976. So while the city can require a homeowner to live in a JADU, it can't require a homeowner to live in the ADU. So that extends this prohibition that was going to sunset and end. AB 1033 allows cities to permit homeowners to sell ADUs as condos separate from the primary dwelling. This is not required, but if this is something the city wants to do, we can look into it. But essentially, the city would have to adopt an ordinance allowing this, and the condos here being the ADUs would have to conform with all objective requirements of the Subdivision Map Act, the city's subdivision ordinance. They would have to be recorded. There'd have to be liens. It's a pretty substantive and detailed process. Utilities would have to be notified and whatnot. The last bill for ADUs is AB 1332. It requires cities by the end of the year to develop a program for pre-approving ADU plans within 30 days. So the city is going to have to post on its website either pre-approved ADU plans that anyone can use, that it has taken from a developer with their consent, or a person who submitted them with their consent, or from another city. Generally, the city has 60 days to review an ADU project, but for the set of pre-approved plans that anyone will be able to use, it'll only have 30 days to review those plans. So I'm working with the planning department to get that done by the end of the year and have the city in compliance as well. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the one of the unique bills. This is Senate Bill 4 by Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco, who does a lot of housing bills in the state legislature. This one is jokingly called Yes in God's Backyard. It requires housing development projects to be a use by right on land owned by religious institutions or colleges. There's a couple key details here that may limit the use of this law, although we'll see. First, the religious institution or Institute of Higher Education has to own the land by the beginning of this year. They had to own it by January 1st, 2024. So it doesn't allow a college to come in, buy a big plot of land and say, hey, we're now going to build a huge dorm here. So all of the units have to be affordable as well, except for the manager units, or a church can reserve 5% for staff, or 20% for moderate income persons. These also must pay the prevailing wage, which may discourage some of this development. But this also, I don't think, affects any colleges in Simi Valley, because the bill defines independent institutions of higher education as non-public higher ed institutes that grant undergraduate degrees, graduate degrees, or both, and that are formed as nonprofits. Next slide, please. I would just note, I think we're getting some interest also. I was talking to Sean earlier about maybe an SB4 project as well, so we will see. But that won't come before the commission, because all the review is ministerial. Housing elements, I think we're familiar with, so I won't go into details about that. But I will just say that in terms of the two new laws, The state AB 434 gives HED more authority to enforce, to specified housing laws, ministerial approval of ADUs, SB 9 lot splits, the new law we just mentioned, SB 4. So that means maybe more lawsuits for cities that refuse to enforce these laws or apply them. AB 821 deals with the conflict between general plan and the zoning code. So under the previous law, if the city amended its general plan in a manner that created inconsistency with the zoning code, there was no built-in enforcement mechanism. The city just had to correct that error when it was pointed out to it within a reasonable period of time. Now the city has 180 days to make that correction. If it doesn't, then someone can seek to apply the looser development standard. Also, the city could be subject to litigation if it doesn't fix this error, and could be forced to pay attorney's fees. Next slide. So there's a couple new parking bills as well. AB 1308 prohibits the city from increasing minimum parking requirements as a condition of approval for single-family homes, including renovations. It complements a previous bill from 2022, which prohibited cities from requiring a public hearing as a condition of reconfiguring space in a single-family home to increase the bedroom count. AB 1317 AB 1317 requires landlords to unbundle parking from rent for releases or rental agreements starting on January 1st of next year. It's kind of a tenant protection law, or at least is the purpose behind it. There's no required city action there, but essentially a landlord will have to have a lease for the tenant, then an addendum to the lease or a separate agreement for parking. So if the tenant doesn't want to pay for parking, they don't have to. Of course, they can't get the parking then. If the tenant fails to pay their parking, they can't be evicted. Can't be the basis for unlawful detainer action, but the owner can revoke the right to park there after 45 days. This only applies to properties that have a certificate of occupancy issued after January 1st of next year and have 16 or more units. So only large new builds. Next slide, please. The last one is Assembly Bill 894. This deals with shared parking agreements. It requires the city to allow new developments to count underutilized or shared parking spaces towards parking requirements that it imposes. So this is something that developers would have to pursue voluntarily. It's not something that the city is required to do without developers wanting to do this. Underutilized parking is generally defined as parking where 20% or more of a development's parking spaces are not occupied during the period when it's going to be shared. The parcels that share parking under this scenario have to be near one another. They have to be within 2,000 feet of one another. If they're more than 2,000 feet, there has to be a shuttle system or a plan. The city has a simple shared parking agreement, shared parking ordinance, excuse me. But the new law requires the city to approve these proposed shared parking agreements if they include a parking analysis with peer-reviewed methodologies by a professional, and have the city can periodically still review the plan and make sure that it's that it's recorded and that it's being upheld and being adhered to. So that is a summary of some of the new laws that affect housing and projects and housing-related projects within the state. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Does anybody have any questions?
You have one question. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Could the city deny a density bonus if we were over our arena goals, or does that have anything to do with it whatsoever?
I don't believe it has anything to do with it.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask that question anyway.
I have a question
By all
too.
means.
I missed, is AB 976 required?
Which law is this one again?
AB 976, it's under ADUs. No owner occupancy in ADU.
Oh, yeah, the city does not and currently can't enact an ordinance that says that a person has to live in the ADU. So,
And that's not affecting anything, any of that 3-year before lot splitting SB 9?
no, it's a separate, process.
you.
Any other questions? Okay, I have one. Under 1449, to make it exempt from CEQA, no flood, no wildfire, no wildlife habitat. Is liquefaction one of those or not?
I think
exclusions?
I think they use the state maintains a database of earthquake zones,
Okay,
and so it's the like Allo Prieto. I think that's the state database that they use. So not exactly liquefaction, but something similar.
okay.
Yeah, if it's in one of those environmentally sensitive areas, such as very high fire hazard, or
Because we did have that come up on another project
Yeah.
not
Right.
too long ago, so.
yeah.
That's it for me. Other questions? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it very much. No other new business? Oral communications and reports.
No items to report under this item.
Any planning commissioners have anything to report? Okay, we're on a roll. No mobile home rent mediation, no tree advisory, no nothing.
Yes, Chairman Mann on the Tree Advisory Board. I'll just report that last April 15th at the City Council, we were awarded the 24th consecutive Tree City USA award from the Arbor Day Foundation and CAL FIRE. So the city is very proud of receiving that award as being classified as a tree city for the 24th year in a row.
Congratulations to the city of Simi Valley for that. Okay, with no other new business, no other comments, this concludes the meeting of April 17th, 2024. Next scheduled meeting will be May 8th, 2024. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, Abby.